Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing? What's that? Ouch. Ouch. He said boo Cardinals. Glad everybody's here. No big major announcements. I gave you the upcoming schedule last week. Just a reminder, we have one more meeting and then there's spring break and then three more meetings going through Easter and the Thursday after Easter to finish out the study of Mark. I don't think there's any other announcements. If you have any questions, of course, ask your leaders and see what they have to say. But otherwise, so glad that you're here. Today, I'm wearing a Cardinals jersey. Yes, I know that had Mike Boo, but I'm wearing a nice Cardinals jersey, and there is a reason why. I went to go visit my mom and dad on Sunday. My mom's not doing great. My dad's doing well. Uh, but a story came out of that, and I want to tell you the quick story is that when I was growing up, the daily ritual, starting when I was in first grade with my dad, was we would read the newspaper at the breakfast table. I would be memorizing every stat in the sports page. My dad would be scouring over the business page, reading the articles and looking at all the numbers every single morning. That's how it went. Well, every February, roughly, the Dallas Morning News, because I grew up in Dallas, the Dallas Morning News would put out a spring training preview issue of their sports section. And besides saying lots of articles saying this is the Rangers' year finally, and it never was, it would give the spring training schedule, not only for the Rangers, but for every single team in the major leagues. And I would look at that and see how close they played together around Miami or around Tampa or around Phoenix. And I'd be like a kid at Christmas time, like, oh my gosh, look at all these teams. And this is before Interleague, so didn't get to see National League very much up in an American League city. So I'd see all these teams playing near each other, and sometimes there'd be a game at 1 and a game at 7:30, but nearby. And every year I'd say, Dad, can we go to spring training for spring break? Can we go out there? And every year he had a great excuse why we could not. Every year it was, oh, it's a bad economy, son. I'm too busy at work, son. Not a good time at work, son. No, we got to save for a rainy day, son. No, we're going to have that big trip this summer, so we can't do that, son. No, we can't do it. Finally, I'm a junior in high school and I won. He agreed to fly out to Miami. We stayed out there for 3 days and we watched four baseball games. We also went to the dog track and went to watch High which is a crazy sport I've ever seen. I created a monster. By October the next year, he's asked me where we're going to go next year. That was fun. Where we're going to go. So over a 5 year span, we went to the Miami area, Tampa area, Phoenix area, Tampa area, Phoenix area, and watched lots and lots of baseball. More than that, we became really, really close friends, which is a big reason why we have such a great relationship today. But the reason I bring it up is because one year, I guess it was the second year, so it was in '84, spring of '84. No, I'm sorry, spring of '85. We go out to the Tampa St. Pete area, and we go to one of the games we go to. It was at St. Pete. March 16th, I took a picture of the scoreboard. It was the Mets against the Cardinals. And we get there early because I'm trying to get autographs. And I've got baseballs and baseball cards trying to get autographs of all these players. And we're standing kind of near the Cardinals dugout. And while I'm trying to get autographs, my dad is befriending all kinds of people, including the ushers who are working there in the stadium. Well, for whatever reason, the usher, maybe they took pity on him. I mean, he wasn't old then, so I don't know what the reason was. It's not like it was now that he's 88 and it would happen, but he wasn't even as old as I am now. And the usher took pity on him and said, "Hey, it's two seats right here. If y'all want to just sit right here." And I was like, "Sure." So we sit down. Stan Musial throws out the first pitch and then sits 2 rows in front of us. And you can tell from here, I took that picture as the teams are being introduced. You can see where we are in the stadium. Incredible seats. To this day, on Sunday, my dad says, "Yeah, remember that game we went to and saw the Cardinals and we just sat up so close and Stan Musial was right there?" He still remembers to this day. And it's all because he befriended an usher who said, "Why don't you take these seats?" All right. Let me call up Harold Skaggs now to take over. I'm going to hand you this so you'll have two microphones. I'll
Thank
turn
you.
that one on.
Thank you. I've owned a shirt because it's the only one that was clean. Okay. Brian, you want to come up? We have been, a bunch of us have been building a house,
A few of us.
a few of us.
Yeah, a few of us. It's kind of coincidental. After several months of planning last fall and recruiting, we took a delivery on January 5th, Monday, January 5th, of a truckload of materials, and we got our storage unit delivered. So that was today's March 5th. So that was 2 calendar months ago. And we started with a pile of material, a pile of crooked lumber, a unleveled slab, and we started work. And we've put in about 20 plus days of work since then. And we're probably within 4 working days of completing the house right now. I'm thinking about 2 more working days, we'll be able to hand it over to the painters. They'll paint the interior and the exterior, and then we'll come back and install the fixtures and the screens and the final thing. So one of the reasons that's happened, and I wanted to recognize Harry Evans today for the tremendous amount of work he did coordinating, recruiting, communicating with volunteers and Men in the Word and throughout the church. We did an outreach working with Whitney to get more people involved, and probably a third or more of our volunteers have been general population from Covenant. There's been teenagers, there's been ladies, there's been a whole raft. We generally have had about 10 people a day out there working. And this build has gone faster than any one we've ever done. So here we are, 20 working days into this, and we've got a house. So Harry, I want to take a moment to thank you for all the work you've done. You've been a big help.
Hey,
There's lots of ways to help on this project, and not all involves a hammer gun. So there we are. We've, like I said, a few more days to go. We've, with a few exceptions, we haven't had too many injuries on the site. And
you notice he looked at me.
And but boy, God's given us great weather. We never could have asked. We've only missed 3 working days this whole 2-month period. So no interruptions. I mean, we built in missing 2 weeks just anticipating that kind of weather. So yeah, so all the elements have fallen into line and led to a great build, and we're getting close to the end. And thank you for all you that have participated, and thank you for everyone that supported us.
Thank you. Well, since this is my slide, the Saturday in the bottom left is the only Saturday we worked, and that's a teenage girl and that's a teenage boy that were brought out, and we had a lot of fun that day. You notice that it's late. This picture's always taken late, and Brian's leaning on a 4-foot level, and Harry's having to hold on to a ladder because he's worn out. I only pictured two of us of the Men in the Word, but the other folks that have been out there. John Fincher's been out there. John Listy's been out there. Phil Wilhite and his wife Patty came, and Ed Boudreau have been out a lot. So we've just had a lot of folks that have come and worked, and it's been fun. Let's stand and sing and pray. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Melt me, mold me, fill me, use me, Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Father, we are indeed grateful for life, for your Son, and for rain. Amen. It's always amazing that the schedule in Men in the Word seems to when we study Gospels that the crucifixion and the passion of Christ comes at about the same time as we get here in time. So we're in Mark 14, the second part of it, and let's go back a few verses to verse, I'm supposed to start at verse 32. Let's go back to verse 26. And there are three things that happen in this section just before: a prediction, a promise, and a prideful boast. And so it says, and when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And the Mount of Olives, I'm sure many of you have been there. I have not. I've been to Buda, but I've never been to the Mount of Olives. And so this is looking from the Mount of Olives back toward the Temple Mount and Jerusalem. So the Kidron, well, I wanted my clicker and now I can't use it. So this is the Kidron Valley. So there's a big valley down here, and probably right in here is where the Garden of Gethsemane is. There you go. Somebody's been there. Off to the right. It was hard to tell from this Mount of Olives whether it was to the left or to the right. So it's over here more, or at least somebody says it is. Mike, you want the clicker? All right. There's somewhere near the Mount of Olives is the Garden of Gethsemane. And apparently there's more than one. There's a traditional one, and then there's somebody else decided it. But the Last Supper was here in this part of Jerusalem, and then it says, and they left and went out to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus said to them, you will fall away, because it's written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. And this comes from Zechariah 13, where he says, strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But he promises them, after I'm raised up, I will go before you into Galilee. I'll meet you there. And Peter said to him, no. After they'll fall away, but I will not. And Jesus said, this very night, you will deny me 3 times before the cock crows. And Peter emphatically said, if I must die with you, I will not deny you. And they all the disciples said the same. This picture, this image of Peter is from an artist, artist from New Mexico named Kenneth Wyeth, like Andrew Wyeth, but Kenneth. And he wanted to paint the disciples, and he just looked for people who he thought looked like the disciples. And this guy was a motorcycler, a farmer marine, and lived in New Mexico. And somebody said, well, you need to go talk to old so-and-so. And he did, and painted him. And so that's his Peter. And I like that Peter. He looks like the impetuous person that scripture depicts him. So now and then he began to teach them that the Son of Man, so let me back up. This gets us to verse 32, but he predicted this. They all knew this was coming. In Mark 8, he said that he began to teach that the Son of Man would suffer many things and be rejected, and that and the chief priests and scribes he would be rejected by the elders and chief priests and be killed, and that he would rise again in 3 days. And he said it plainly. So he's been preparing the disciples for going to Jerusalem. We're going to Jerusalem, he said. The Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests, condemned to death, delivered, and they'll mock him and spit on him, flog him and kill him. And after 3 days, he will rise. He's told them. He is omniscient. He knows what's coming. But the disciples can't seem to quite get that in their head as to what's going on. So, and they went to a place called Gethsemane. Some sources say Gethsemane means oil press. So it's an olive garden where there was apparently an oil press. And this is an image of the current Garden of Gethsemane, The original Garden of Gethsemane was apparently raised after in 70 AD when the Romans knocked down the temple, and so they took they cleared it, if you will, and used the lumber, and so those trees are gone that Jesus would have been praying under. But some of these I understand are 3,000 years old, so they're old trees anyway. But this is the type. But you can see that this garden, there's houses right back here. So this is in a little enclave of peace there in just by the Mount of Olives. And he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." All the disciples. They all went with him. And he said, "Y'all all sit here while I go pray." And he took Peter, James, and John with him. And he says to them a plaintive request. "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch." He didn't say take a nap. He said, "Remain here and watch." He went a little further, fell on the ground, and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He knew what was coming. Jesus knew that what was before him was not only physical pain, but the emotional pain of receiving all the debts and sins that you and I and people immemorial had done on him, and that would separate him from God, because God is a just God, and he had to atone for that. And he knew that atonement, that separation, that alienation from his Father whom he loved. And he said, "Daddy, Daddy, all things are possible. Remove this from me." How many of you who are parents have ever had a child look up at you and say, "Daddy, can you?" Well, you'll bust your butt to do whatever they just ask you for. So, "Daddy, all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will be done." And he came back and they were sleeping, and he said, "Could you not watch?" And then the famous statement, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." And it certainly is. And again, he went away and prayed the same thing, came back, and they were still sleeping. And a third time he went away and he found them the same way and said, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough," Jesus said. "The hour has come." The hour that he had been telling them about, that he had been saying, we're going to Jerusalem, we're going to be rejected, we're going to be arrested. He says, "The hour has come, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise and let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." So he could see that this isn't a big garden and it's dark. And my visual image is that they've got torches, because so they've got to be running around, and there's a big mob of people. And so, he knew they were coming. They are at hand, he says. So the discovery questions this morning might be these: who are you in this story, and why? Have you ever failed a friend as Jesus's friends failed him when they slept? And he repeatedly predicted his confrontation, but why didn't Peter, James, and John get it? And when trouble, Jesus consistently stops to pray. This isn't the first time. The feeding of the 5,000 was when he had gone away to pray. Why don't we when that happens? So talk among yourselves, and I'll be back. Jesus says, "My betrayer is at hand." Throughout Mark's kind of the cliff notes of the Gospels, and many scholars think that he was the first, he wrote the first of them, and that the others, Matthew and Luke and John, were written, or Matthew and Luke for sure, were kind of used this as their source material. But he says immediately, and he says that a lot because it's a fast moving book. And immediately while he was speaking, while he was telling his disciples what he was saying, Judas came, one of the 12, with him a crowd with swords and clubs. And I underline that because the Jews were not allowed to have swords. The only people that had swords were the Roman soldiers. And so there had to be Roman soldiers. There, in other gospels, it says that there were Roman soldiers. But the fact that Mark says that they had swords and clubs indicates that there were at least some Roman soldiers with them. And from the chief priests, scribes, and elders, you noticed that the ones that are the puppeteers are not there. They don't want to be associated with this conflagration that's about to happen. They sent their minions to take care of that, and they sent them out there to get them following Judas. And the betrayer had given them a sign saying, the one I will kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard. Don't let him get away. And when he came up to him, and he went up to him at once and said, "Teacher," and kissed him. And they laid hands on him and seized him. What an intimate betrayal. You know, he could have just pointed and said, "That's him right there. That that one." But he didn't. I don't know, there's something about the intimacy of that just grabbed me. That he came up and kissed him. I'm sure it was the traditional on the cheek, but kissed him and called him teacher. One of the things that we have to remember is how Judas gets a terrible rap, and he betrayed Jesus. But without Judas, the plan that God had come up with for our salvation of sending Jesus to earth could not have taken place because Jesus had to be betrayed. So he did what he was God's instrument in that process. He thought Jesus, like most of the disciples, had seen, we were just talking about this at our table. They left their nets because he was charismatic. And then they followed him around, and he was pretty smart, and he knew stuff. And besides that, he could heal people from illnesses. And I mean, even dead people got up by his power. And then he began to talk about going to Jerusalem and dying and doing what? Well, I'll rise on the third day. Check. Okay, well now what else can we do? And he told them what was going to happen. Peter said to him, he said, "Who do they say I am?" And Peter said, "Well, you're the Messiah. You're the Christ. You're the one that's going to come and free us Jews from this oppression of the Romans. We're going to have a new Jerusalem." Been 400 years and nothing had happened except oppression. And so their paradigm was that he was going to come in power to be the ruler over them and with power. That's why James and John said, can I be your chief of staff and your secretary of state? Can I be on your right and your left hand? And he said, you don't know what you're asking for. So when we look down on these disciples for snoozing, and we look down on Judas for his betrayal, as we should, we have to realize their paradigm of what was going on was they never got the true purpose of Jesus coming to earth, that he came to atone for our sins. And so, but one of those, Peter's now very awake. One of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. You notice Mark doesn't say Jesus healed his ear. Other people did. And Jesus said, have you come out with against a robber with swords and clubs? After day I was in the temple and you could have gotten me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled. Stop all this. Now, one of the reasons that we think, that some commentators think, that Mark chose in verse 47 to say one of these rather than Peter. Peter's identified in the other Gospels, and they came later, is that Mark was a disciple, if you will, of Peter. He was his scribe. He was the one who wrote down Peter's sermons. He wrote down Peter's thoughts. He wrote things down for Peter. And so he was there, but he was not a disciple. He was just there. And so because Peter was his daddy figure, he didn't want to say, well, old Phil Wilhite whacked his ear off and, man, that didn't ruin his reputation or send the Romans after him. He just said, well, one of those did that. And so that relationship is shown in this particular moment. And so he says, let scriptures be fulfilled. Isaiah 53 says, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed. He is Jesus. He is the Messiah. He was crushed. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. And by his wounds, we are healed. He was oppressed and afflicted and didn't open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter. And as sheep before a shearer is silent, so he did not open his mouth. And then he was assigned the grave of the wicked. Scriptures to be fulfilled. And we can jump forward a little bit to the crucifixion. And one of the things Jan taught me in this process was that she said, you know what passion means? Because this is called the Passion of Christ. And in Greek, this means the struggle or the words or sound like that this is his, well, I swear. I'll come back to it. Anyway, so David back in Psalms talked about what some of the things that what Jesus said on the cross. That they said, if you remember, that the Roman soldiers said, yeah, you trust the Lord, let him deliver you. Come down off that cross. You can do that. And they will divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garments. And then at his last words were, my God, why have you forsaken me? David's words prescient to Jesus' crucifixions. So let the scriptures be fulfilled from Zechariah 13, and they all left him and fled, says verse 50. And then we have this little cute vignette. And a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body. They seized him. He left the linen cloth and ran away, naked. He was a streaker. Well, not really, but he ended up being a streaker. So this young man was Mark. Virtually everybody, every commentary I read decided it was Mark. And that the reason he put this in there was to validate the fact that he was there. And that he was indeed an eyewitness of what went on. And because everyone knew he was a young man hooked to Peter and that Peter was there. The scenario you can paint in your head is that, he was at home asleep and heard all the commotion and jumped up and grabbed something to put on, ran out of the house and got it to the garden, and the guard grabbed his sheet and took it. And so he ended up being a little starkers, as they say. So what are the keys out of this, at least for me, were pray. You can either speak it or write it or read it or be silent, but develop a relationship with God. God isn't the cosmic ballet. God isn't the guy that you say, Lord, we need rain. Please make it rain. Well, that's fine, but that's not his job. His job is to be our Father. What is what is my Garden of Gethsemane? Where are the burdens that I can't carry alone anymore? And will I ask a friend to pray with me? We all experience at one time or another rejection, betrayal, even abandonment. What do we do when our world falls apart? And all humanity, is like this streaker, naked, terrified, running, vulnerable, exposed without Christ. So what might further discussion be? Jesus quoted Zechariah when he predicted his disciples would lead him. How did God use this very human tendency for them to lead? For you, what is unexpected in this arrest account? Don't skip this one. Why did Jesus have to die? This is the crux of the gospel. And what is the result of his death? And what do you think, why do you think Mark included the streaker incident I just told you that? When I got to why did Jesus have to die, God just pounded on me. The Holy Spirit just pounded on me and said, do you get it, Skaggs? God is a just God. He cannot tolerate sins. He cannot abide by them. He cannot accept them. He can't just say, oh, well, you tried. You get a prize anyway. You get a trophy. You participated. No, he's a just God. If we sin, that sin is on, we have a debt. If you take money from the bank, you've got a debt. If you sin, you've got a debt. I have a debt with God, and I can't pay it. I am broke. I am totally unable to pay that debt. But Jesus, at his death, took all of those debts of all humanity onto him. And when he did so, he was alienated and backed away from God, just like we would be if we could not be atoned. So this is a big deal. Why did Jesus have to die? Because you and I are sinners. And he atoned for those sins. He paid the price. I've told you guys in the past, a Maundy Thursday 35 years ago in Covenant Hall, or in the sanctuary, there was a cross up on the chancel, and we were to write down a prayer or a concern, and then go put it at the foot of the cross, tack it to the foot of the cross. And so as we were all, it was quiet. This was a wooden, kind of a rough old wood cross. And there were little tacks and nails up there. And so you could hear people up there going, tack, 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 as they were tacking their little sticky notes to the cross. And after I did so, I came back and I sat down and I had this unmistakable image of the blood of Christ, that all of our notes had been written in red ink because they were sins. And all of those notes had red note of adultery and stealing and lying and all the things that we had done. And that red ink was being covered by the blood of Christ as it came down the cross. And you couldn't read them anymore.